Hello, from the cloudy Copenhagen. Welcome to the webinar Data Insights to Foster the Uptake of Energy Efficiency Technologies in EU Residential Buildings, hosted by Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. My name is Aris. I'm working as a program officer at the Copenhagen Center, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. A couple of things before we move to the main content of our webinar. This webinar is going to be about 70 minutes long, including time for the Q&A session at the end. In case you cannot stay until the end or want to get back to our presentations, all the materials and recording of the whole webinar will be available online in a few days on the Copenhagen Center Knowledge Management System. And we have many other webinars and information there. Have a look. I'll give more information in a few minutes. Before we start discussing about today's topic, I would like to inform our attendees that we comply with the General Data Protection Act, also known as GDPR. This means that your personal data, such as name, email, workplace, etc., is safely processed and stored, and all of our rights pursuant to the GDPR are respected. You have full access to the data being processed about you, and at any time you can request that inaccurate data be deleted or rectified. For access or further information, please contact with the people that are presenting here. A few things about the Copenhagen Center on Energy Efficiency. The Center conducts research and advisory activities in the fields of energy efficiency and serves as energy efficiency hub for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. The Center has an established network of global, regional, and national partners with a broad range of stakeholders to help accelerate the implementation of energy efficiency activities. On a regular basis, the Copenhagen Center is conducting webinars. All materials, including recordings and presentations from previous webinars, can be found on Copenhagen Center's Knowledge Management System under the e-learning section. The material of today's webinars will be uploaded shortly, but until then, you can check one of the recommended webinars that are related to today's topic. Now, I would like to briefly introduce the speakers of today's webinar. Zeno is working as a business developer for the Climate-KIC, and Clara is a PhD candidate at the Chalmers University in Sweden. Finally, I would like to inform that you can send us your questions during the presentations, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Please do not forget to mention the name of the panelist that the question is for. And with that, I would like now to give the floor to Zeno. Zeno, the floor is yours.
So my name is Zeno Winkels. I work for the Climate-KIC, on which I will tell you a little bit more later in the presentation. And I will start by explaining you a little bit about the building market briefs, basically the main topic of today's webinar. This is a nice graph, I think, to have a look at when we talk about the ambitious strategy of turning the EU countries well, carbon neutral, of at least at 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions in 2050. You can see the different usages per country, and on the left side you can see the tons of oil equivalent, and a ton of oil is about 10,000 kilowatt hours. And what this graph really shows you, and that's why I'm showing it, is basically that it's really difficult to compare the different countries, because there's variations, and also the graphs only tell us so much. And when we went out to think about building market briefs, the challenge was really, how can we inform readers on the data on the real estate market and energy use and the buildings, that they can compare to the sources they actually know. And this so far has led to 5 building market briefs, although we'll have a couple more by Christmas, that are written by local institutes. I mean, you know, Knight Frank is based in London, you know, Wuppertal in Germany, and you can of course see the logos under the brochures. And with those local expertise, we make comparable data for all the countries. So it's really important for us that when you are aware of the situation in the Netherlands, as I am, that you are perfectly able to make an interpretation of the French building market brief, because you understand that what a square meter is, and you understand that that is including or excluding the walls, it's just completely comparable. We have also now developed the building market briefs of Spain, Italy, Belgium, and Slovenia. I'm quite sure they will be ready before Christmas. And we are developing a booklet or a building market brief on the city of Leuven, and one on the non-residential stock in the UK, just to see a little bit if we can add value there, and if there's more or less demand for those two topics. Especially at city level, there's of course a lot going to happen in the coming years, which then of course you will find also at the national level. If we look at the next slide, it's really about sharpening focus. That's really a slide on what was the result of this co-creation process, and was there an alignment need of key national framing conditions, of market size, building stock morphology, potential market size, and stakeholder groups perceived barriers, especially to low carbon technology uptake. We used co-creation workshop with the community, basically twice with over 26 people, to form an idea of what should be the content of the building market briefs. Then we had literature research done, lots of target group interviews, and a huge literature study. I think this is the moment where we can go a little bit deeper into the content that we have sort of divided in 3 parts, a part A, B, and C. And while you can read what's going on here, and you will certainly receive it in your email later, it's very important to understand that the module A is based on a literature-based assessment, and it summarizes and contextualizes the available data and information from both national and international databases. In the chapter B, we get a little bit more synthetic in the way that it's a model-based assessment, where it models the potential market volume for key technologies based on the countries and the 2050 targets. There are several alternative pathways, of course, that we can show, and that we do show in chapter B. In chapter C, there's a building stock model based. So there we have modeled the building stock of the specific country, and there we base ourselves for the future on big part of property owners. They are being interviewed regarding their barriers and their needs, as well as their decision criteria. And I don't know the numbers by heart, but the survey is of a huge volume at the moment. It's getting pretty valuable as it is now, because we have so much information there to compare. At the moment, the market briefs are very much in the booklets like you've seen them. So every country has one, and basically we haven't had time yet to compare countries and find the nice red lines between developments. This is an example of the laid out structure of the report. Basically, every 2-pager addresses a goal, and you can see the topics, of course. And what you can see, what I really in particular like, is the green text, where local experts can contextualize and validate the information that is given in the graphs and in the text. And of course, these local experts are the contact details of these local experts are listed at the beginning of the report. So if you have a person here who has a really strong opinion on the opportunities for heat pumps in the Netherlands, you will find at the beginning of the report his or her contact details, and you'll be perfectly fine to contact them and find more information, perhaps about their comment or just perhaps about their country, etc. Now we go to benefits per target group. This is basically the slide that I now realize has no Climate-KIC logo, but this is where I planned to explain to you a little bit more about the Climate-KIC, which is a knowledge innovation community funded by the EIT. Funding, you would have to think about something between 80 and 100 million a year. And the Climate-KIC distributes most of that budget to its partners, like the universities, like the institutes. Well, you saw like Wuppertal and Knight Frank that I mentioned on one of the first slides. to spend the budget on projects that we feel can really make a systemic difference in transforming Europe in the light of the energy transformation, but basically the adaptation that we need to make to climate change, and of course the mitigation of even more climate change. We fund technology suppliers, and we feel that the building market briefs can be of particular relevance for them. We also think startups that have no budget to do a good market analysis can use the building market briefs. Like I said, based on knowledge of the country they live, they can find knowledge on the other countries. Fair enough, we are there basically for every professional that wants to compare countries and needs 100% comparable data. I am afraid I have just explained to you what is on this slide, so that means we'll probably run a little bit ahead if we count seconds. Let's see, what I think as a business developer, what I like most of this slide is the link with the local market experts network. I explained to you about the importance of that. We've set up a foundation, the QS Foundation at qsanalytics.eu, where we actually show the local market experts that write the building market briefs, and you can connect to them and basically via them connect to, I would say, 80% of people that you should be connected to in the country that you're interested in when you're in this field. For the growth of the project, we've built a map which shows that we've started in Switzerland, basically because TAP Energy helps us so well with these building market briefs, and they are based there. Then we made new ones in 2017, and you can see what's happening from 2018 onwards. We're basically targeting 4 a year, and of course the ones that have been made like 2 years ago, we are in the process of updating them as we go along, which is of course a lot less work than the initial work that's been spent on the first building market brief. What I want to leave you with before questions come at the end of the webinar is that we funded this as the Climate-KIC because there are so many target groups benefiting. It's basically the technology suppliers, the large ones and the small ones, as I explained, the old ones and the young ones that are so important in the innovative field we are all working in. It's there for the policymakers. It's possibly there for import and export advisors, and it's there just in general for professionals that want to compare countries and need data that is 100% comparable, because that is really something that we are introducing here at a scale that is not available elsewhere in Europe. And with that, I think I can leave you to the hands of the webinar organizer again.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Aris, for the floor, and also thank you, Zeno, for this overview and introduction to the Building Market Brief Initiative, or BMB, as we typically call it. As Aris already mentioned, my name is Clara Camarasa. I'm a PhD candidate at Chalmers University, and during the development of my PhD thesis, I have also been involved in the BMB project that we're describing today here from the very beginning, which implies being one of the main responsible in the co-creation of the conceptual framework, as well as the consolidation of the consortium. I was also the project manager of the initiative from the beginning, now supported by our colleagues in Switzerland, and I am currently one of the main content developers and authors of the reports. Now, after Zeno's introduction to the initiative, I will be providing a deep dive into the content, that is to say, describing the objective, the scope, the methodology behind the reports, as well as a synthesis of the results for the case of Spain. Now, as Zeno highlighted in this presentation, one of the key USPs of the Building Market Briefs, this is to say the unique selling point of the initiative, was to be able to have a cross-country comparability of the results across all EU member states. And this is due to the fact that one of the first things we encountered when analyzing the building stock in the European Union in relation to its energy efficiency and carbon emission was the lack of cross-country comparability of information. Each country was basically doing its own little thing. So different methodologies, different scopes, different approaches, which led, of course, to a very inconsistent overview of the situation. Now, taking the perspective of the technology suppliers and policymakers, our chief target groups, as Zeno already explained, we identified that one of the key barriers in the promotion of energy efficiency and low carbon solutions was this lack of data. It hindered the business development of these technologies, as well as the development of evidence-based policy instruments. So for example, technology suppliers companies were not 100% to what extent it was profitable to market certain energy efficiency technologies within their own portfolio in certain European markets. And as they themselves stated, and here I'm going to quote one of them, marketing technologies is a costly activity and therefore can be a risky move. We not always have the opportunity to take risks within our own companies. Having said this, we also within the building market briefs didn't want to take risks, so we armored ourselves with very strong partners in each of the countries in order to be able to gather the data that we needed in order to generate the insights we wanted to provide. These are some of the partners that support us in delivering the data, but as Zeno already mentioned, also validating the results for each of the markets. But what exact data would they need and in what format? So to this end, we followed up the preliminary interviews with a number of co-creation workshops, target group interviews, and desktop studies, as then already explained. And we identified key topics, which can be summarized under these three main headings, which are the market framework conditions affecting the market or the building market of these technologies, such as the building stock structure or climate goals or policy framework, etc. Technology diffusion in the uptake of energy efficiency technologies and market dynamics was another one, which is the second heading or the second part of the reports. And the third and last one is market volumes, which is basically what is the market potential in each country and what are feasible development scenarios in order to achieve carbon goals. Now, the format in which the majority of the people we interviewed preferred to have the data was a report. So once we identified the key topics, we then classified them into different methodologies we had followed in order to gather that information, which then derived into different chapters of the report, as I'm now explaining. The three main methodologies and therefore chapters were A, literature-based method for the market overview. The second one was empirical evidence method for the market diffusion and dynamics. And the third one was building stock modeling for the market development scenarios and potential volumes. I will now provide some of the examples of the results that we have gathered for the Spanish market. So starting with chapter A, this chapter provides an overview of the country's building market structure and its background conditions, as well as current trends, market mechanisms behind the demand of energy efficiency building products. It is divided into six main topics, as you can see here in this slide, and it begins by providing a brief introduction of the country's economy and society, showcasing trends in GDP, population, and incomes. Next, a characterization of the building stock is presented, along with climate factors that would likely have an impact on the future of the building stock. Energy and emission profiles of the country are also summarized, including trends, grid mixes, emission factors, and the implications this or climate goals would have on these. This is followed by an overview of the current framework of policy incentives in the building sector, including thermal standards, financial support mechanisms, etc. Trends in employment and building costs, as well as investments, are also described. And in the final sections, we delve into issues such as demand, supply, and affordability of housing in the specific country. Now, in terms of the method, this chapter, as I mentioned earlier, is based on an extensive literature study covering a wide range of literature and data sources, which include, as Zeno already mentioned, European statistical data, the respective country, also own statistical offices, national and international public reports, scientific publications, and market information such as prices and sales volumes. The main contribution of this chapter is therefore the collection as well as synthesis of this information, which is currently only available in a fragmented manner. One of the insights provided in this chapter is the country's economy and society, A1. So the graph you can see in this slide. This graph describes trends in GDP, disposable income, and population for the Spanish market in this case. It is indexed to 100 in 2005, so one can better appreciate the development of these variables in the last decade, or decade and a half. And as we can see, after the financial recession in 2007-2008, Spain's GDP started growing moderately due to an increase in net exports, job creation, and private consumption. So did the disposable income, and in terms of the population, it seems to have stabilized since 2012-2013. When it comes to describing the building stock, we also show the building typology structure through the percentage of residential versus non-residential buildings in the country, which in the case of Spain, it is a 13 to 87% ratio. The building typology structure is complemented then also, in this case, by the tenure structure of the buildings, showing the percentage of private owned versus owner occupied. And as we can see in the case of Spain, Spain has one of the highest privately owned stocks in Europe, with 96% of the dwellings being privately owned versus 79% occupied by the owner. Now, in order to characterize a policy framework, rather than simply describing it qualitatively, we go for a more quantitative approach, which allows us to have a more, let's say, unequivocal comparability across countries. What we do is basically to collect the progression of U values for the building components dictated by building standards during the past decades. And in this graph, for instance, in the example of Spain, we can see that, of course, the building standards, as is in the case of many other European countries, have become increasingly stringent. Before 2006, so before the main building code in Spain was established, only very few basic requirements for energy saving in floors, facades, and roofs were demanded. And after 2006, minimum U values for windows entered into force, and the level of demand increased in other building elements such as the roof, facade, or the floors. But these are just some of the examples you can find in Chapter A, so the first part of the report. Yet there are many more graphs and insights that can be found in this chapter, characterizing the overall market conditions, such as heating degree days, residential building space, energy consumption trends, types of energy sources, among others. Unfortunately, I won't have the time to explain all of these within the webinar, but I will share a link at the end of my presentation where you can access this information. Now, going to the next chapter of the reports, to Chapter B, the aim of this chapter is to provide stakeholder views on residential building projects. The purpose of this chapter is to support the development of technology, marketing campaigns, as well as evidence-based policy measures to foster the uptake of energy efficiency technologies at scale. We do that by describing the building market dynamics and technology diffusion trends through key topics that I will explain now. The chapter is divided into these 8 main topics, which you can see here in this slide. The first 2 sections are dedicated to define the scope and rationale of the chapter. So B1 describes the value chain, that is the stakeholders involved in each of the phases, as well as their role in the technology deployment and how we have addressed this in the study. B2 characterizes the different building typologies and project types present in the European building market, and again, how have they been described or addressed in this study. And B3 to B8 describe what have been identified as key topics in the uptake of energy efficiency to support marketing and policy instruments. The information contained in this chapter has been gathered through an empirical-based evidence, more specifically through an online survey, in which we interviewed more than 1,000 people in each country, sampling all stakeholder groups involved in the residential building value chain, as I will show now in the next slide. Now, to describe the various market segments in each country, from maintenance projects to new construction, going through deep or comprehensive retrofit projects, and to make sure that all building typologies were addressed, as well as every stakeholder group relevant from this perspective, we made use of a stratified sample approach. This means we made sure that we have enough responses per building project, building typology, and stakeholder group to be able to extract this divide in the results. It is also important to note that the characterization of the population for each country was based on numbers and types of enterprises present in the construction sector, according to the statistical classification of economic activities in the European community, that is NACE. Now, starting with the stakeholder groups, so the main sample of our survey and the main hub of information for the second part of the reports. As you can see in figure B11 to your left, and probably most of you already know, the building value chain is complex and fragmented in its nature. To typify the stakeholder groups relevant to the deployment of energy efficiency technologies in buildings in Europe, and given the end of life is out of scope in this study, we conducted more than 14 semi-structured interviews with stakeholders across these 7 phases I've highlighted here with a green box. And the result was a long table of more than 16 stakeholder groups that were relevant within this, the uptake of energy efficiency technologies in this context. From architects to installers, going through technology suppliers, housing associations, etc. Each of them holding a different perspective, role, and responsibility within the value chain and also within the uptake of the energy efficiency technology. These could be clustered into 3 main perspectives, as I show here in the table B12 to your right. Each and every single one of these 16 groups have been addressed in the survey for each country, and therefore their responses, their perspectives have been taken into consideration when showing the results. Now, the second parameter we needed to describe were the building typologies. Building typologies, I know most of you probably already know, but I'll just make a quick synthesis, are a set of model buildings with their own age of construction, geometry, thermophysical, and energy performance properties. The building composition and viable energy solutions vary substantially among these different building typologies. So characterizing and identifying the building typology is crucial in this study in order to be able to characterize that market. In the EU context, Tabula is probably one of the biggest initiatives to describe the EU building typologies. As you can see here in the figure B21 to your left, I've left an example of residential building typologies for Germany and how these have been characterized. We did follow Tabula, the Tabula classification for building typologies. However, to simplify this for the survey responses and for the survey or the data collection, building typologies were clustered into two main groups based on the number of dwellings. These are single or multi-dwellings. And this can be seen in table B22 to your right. So the cluster single dwelling buildings contained single family houses, semi-detached house, terrace houses and row houses, whereas the cluster multi-dwelling buildings contained small and large multi-dwelling buildings, multi-dwelling houses. Another critical parameter in describing the residential building market are the project types that exist, the types of projects that exist within the life cycle of the building, or the types of interventions that are undertaken within a building. These are presented in figure B23 to your left. Some of them are construction, operation, maintenance, repair, reinstatement, retrofit, deep retrofit, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, if not on a professional level, at least on a private level with your own houses. Being end of life out of scope, as I already mentioned, of the study, the number of and types of projects within the survey were clustered into three main groups, which are distinguished between, or are distinguished based on the trigger, or the reason behind the investment. These are new, so new construction, problem-based, which are repair, overhaul, or partial retrofit, and opportunity-based, which are deep retrofit. In B3, we try to map the level of competences of different stakeholder groups across various energy efficiency solutions by characterizing their level of experience in or across different energy efficiency technologies, from no experience to part of their day-to-day work. We do that for different stakeholder groups to assess how does it differ for different perspectives. In this case, I'm showing the enablers perspectives in Spain. And what we intend to do here is to quantify the level of knowledge of each of these groups to tailor training or capacity programs based on their specific market needs. Now, as we can see here in this graph, in the case of Spain, most of the enablers surveyed have worked with the selected energy efficiency technologies at least once. This is a relatively homogeneous high level of familiarity across all the technologies, with around 20% of the responses stating that the technology was part of their day-to-day work. Around another 10 to 15 state having worked with the technology several times, again, quite homogeneous across the technologies. And responses indicating no familiarity with the technologies differ across the technology groups, but for heat pumps and electrical cooling systems are probably the highest, with around 25% of the responses indicating no experience with them. Now, in most European countries, the current state of the building stock is mostly unknown due to the limited monitoring of not only past, but also present retrofit measures. Insights into what measures are being implemented in the market, differentiated by building typologies and project types, as I already described before, are critical to better understand the building stock condition as well as current trends in technology diffusion. As you can see in this graph, we understand that this might also change from one building typology to another. That is why we collect and showcase our results also based on multi and single dwelling buildings. So out of each of the building components, the bar to the left is the single dwelling buildings and the bar to the right is the multi-dwelling buildings. In addition to this, we label the actions between the different measures or the different types of measures to the technology. So we try to categorize according to what exactly has been done in the technology. Was it maintained? Was it upgraded? Did they add a new element, or simply nothing was done? As you can see in the slide, in Spain, the types of measures implemented in overhaul projects do not vary substantially, across building typologies, except for the outer wall. The most often implemented measures in single dwelling buildings are the addition of new cooling systems. On the other hand, in multi-dwelling buildings, the most often implemented measures are maintenance or upgrade of the outer wall or window. Now, the construction process involves a wide variety of stakeholders with different backgrounds, roles, interests within one single project. So knowing which stakeholders are involved in the action leading to the technology selection, as well as their level of power in the decision, is essential to better understand the decision-making environment around the technology selection. This information can be of great value for technology suppliers or technology marketing campaigns aiming to scale their energy efficiency technology solutions by enabling the identification of key players as well as potential influencers. That is why in B5, we wanted to map and assess stakeholders involved in the technology selection process, as well as their level of power in the decision. And in order to examine and visualize the stakeholder setup, we utilized social network analysis, or SNA, as it's oftentimes called. For those of you who are not familiar with SNA, it is the process of investigating social structures using networks and graph theory. The networks consist of nodes, which are the individual actors or stakeholders within the network, and the other elements are the edges or links that connect these actors or stakeholders, so the relationship or interactions between them. For the figures we see in the slide, the circles represent the different stakeholder groups. The size of the circle represents the level of power in the decision. Therefore, the bigger the circle, the greater the level of power. The intensity of communication among the stakeholders during the technology selection is represented by a line. So the thickness of the line and type of line represents the level of communication, from communicating on a regular basis, meaning daily, which we have highlighted here in the graph with a red line, to seldom communicating. In the case of no communication at all, no line was traced. Now, when looking at overhaul projects in Spain, which are the graphs you see in the slide, the stakeholders set up in the technology selection vary substantially between single and multi-dwelling buildings. In single dwelling buildings, so the network you see to your left, the installers have the greatest influence on the decision as defined by the level of power, meaning the size of the circle, as I mentioned before. On the other hand, in multi-dwelling buildings, which is the network you see to your right, the power is shared between the architects and the construction companies. Now, in terms of the interactions, the single dwelling building case reveals a high level of communication among the architects, the installers, and construction companies, and demand-side actors such as property owners, for example. And in the case of multi-dwelling buildings, the strongest interaction takes place between the architects, the construction companies, and the engineers. Now, motives for initiating or developing building projects tend to differ across building groups. Insights on ambitions, interests, or inclinations of demand-side actors, such as developers or housing companies, can be crucial to better understand their decision-making criteria behind these projects. And this information, in turn, can serve as a valuable basis to develop marketing campaigns tailored to stakeholder needs and even requirements. B6 of the B&B reports describes stated motivations behind residential building projects, and we complemented this information with hindering factors for not pursuing even higher performing buildings, meaning even more energy efficient solutions within their projects. Once again, the results were clustered between overhaul and comprehensive retrofit projects. As we understand, these are two very distinct projects and the motivation might change. And as we see in this graph in Spain, their reported motivations, which is the pie chart to your left, of demand-side actors behind overhaul projects are in many cases technical aspects, such as buildings update for future-proof, or part of the building or technology reached the end of its lifetime. The second most often selected are economy-related matters, such as lower energy or operation costs, or increase of the value of the building or respective parts. And according to the surveyed sample, when it comes to the barriers for not implementing even more energy efficiency technologies in overhaul projects, economic related matter, which is the pie chart to your right, economic related matters are conceived as the most relevant. Common arguments that were identified in this cluster are overall budget limitations and focus on other measures. Now, needless to say that buildings are complex entities consisting of an extensive range of elements and components. The carbon and energy efficiency of a building depends not only on the performance of each of these components, but also on their design and operation within a whole building system and in relation to other conditions, such as local climate conditions, for instance. Stakeholder views on which energy efficient building solutions are most promising can provide a valuable starting point in deciding which technologies should be promoted or prioritized in each country. Following this rationale, in section B7 of the B&B reports, we identified which building components building concepts market actors judge as the most promising in their own national context to reduce carbon emissions and therefore achieve climate goals. Given that the technical solutions might vary across building typologies, the project types, of course, also affect this. We distinguish between new buildings and refurbishment. And we included here the perspective of all stakeholder groups present in the value chain, but we excluded those with no practical experience in residential building projects. So only people that had practical experience in building projects were able to respond. Results show that in new buildings in Spain, this is the graph to your left, the system perceived to have the greatest potential to contribute to reaching climate potential goals is the building envelope, with 29% of the responses. And solutions for reaching the climate goals actually don't differ much in this case, in this particular market, between new buildings and refurbishment projects. In Spain, as you can see, in refurbishment projects, so the graph to your right, the building envelope is also perceived to have the greatest potential to contribute to reaching to climate goals. Now, it has been widely stated that the market barriers, or several market barriers, hinder the uptake of energy efficient solutions in the European Union context. But actually, market barriers are by their own nature, by their very nature, context specific, and therefore can vary considerably between countries, building typologies, stakeholder groups, and even the technology itself, right? So identifying hurdles for specific technologies was an essential first step, or we believe it's an essential first step to designing marketing and policy instruments capable of overcoming these barriers. Based on this understanding, section B8 is dedicated to showcasing stakeholders' perceived barriers to specific solutions. Now, we gathered this information for more than 15 energy efficiency solutions. Although due to a space constraint within the report, we only showcase the technology group that has been identified to have the greatest potential in refurbishment projects. And why is this? Why do we only show the barriers and drivers for retrofit projects? This is because we reckon the European Union's focus on retrofit activities rather than new construction. The figures in this slide visualize the survey results for installation, high performance windows, and low carbon materials. As technologies or solutions within the building envelopes. The building envelope is, as you might remember from the previous slide, the approach that have been identified as hosting the greatest potential in refurbishment projects in Spain. The results include the responses from all stakeholder groups that had expressed medium to high level of practical experience in this technology. This means only experienced people with the technology could answer to this question, as we didn't want that people that had no clue were to be able to answer to this or have a comment on this in order to avoid any potential inconsistencies in the results. As you can see in this graph, in Spain, hurdles to large-scale deployment of insulation, high-performance windows, and low-carbon materials are mostly the same across the technologies. For all three of these solutions, economic-related aspects, such as low energy prices or lack of subsidies or affordable products, or even actually tax incentives, lack of tax incentives, are identified as the most relevant barriers, ranging from 19 to 22% of the responses. And this is it for Chapter B. Unfortunately, I don't have time to describe further chapters or further content of the report, so I won't be able to deep dive into the scenario development of the market volumes that have been modeled. And also, I cannot stress enough that this is only some of the insights or some of the information we have gathered within the report to support the large-scale diffusion of energy efficiency and low-carbon technologies. There is much more information that you will be able to find in each of these reports. I have also only shared information on one country, that is Spain. We have more than 11 countries already, as Zeno already mentioned, in our registry. And we're building around 4 to 5 markets every year, including non-residential and cities that will be available end of this year, so in a few weeks. And yeah, with a great advantage that this information has been gathered with a rigorous and consistent scientific methodology with a high level of transparency that allows for cross-country comparability of the results, which is indeed a unique standing point in respect to energy efficiency building and market data in the European Union. So if you would be interested in further information, I would encourage you to click on the link I provide here, here'sanalytics.eu, where you can download the report as well as find updates of upcoming publications or further details on the initiative. Having said this, I thank you all very much for your time and your attention. If you would have any further questions or suggestions, please don't hesitate to contact me through camarasa@chalmers.se, and hope you enjoyed this webinar and that you find it somewhat useful. Thank you very much for attending and looking forward to the questions and answers round.
Thank you very much, Clara, for your very interesting presentations. We slowly start receiving some questions. So the first question is for Zeno. I hope, Zeno, you're still online with us. How many years has the initiative been running?
Oh, I think we're already in the 3rd year of it at the moment.
There is another question. I don't know if it is for you, Zeno, or Clara. Maybe you can both contribute to the third one. What countries will you be doing next year? And are you planning to extend into non-EU countries?
Maybe I can try to answer that from the Climate-KIC perspective, because we have been funding these building market briefs, and what we want to fund is projects that scale up and that find their own place in the market. That means that we, as the Climate-KIC, ask the consortium to come up with more building market briefs. Now, speaking from the consortium, they are ready to accept sponsorships and to develop themselves also outside Europe, but it's not so easy to choose which countries to go to and then to target those. So they're basically building up an area where sponsors can sponsor the Q's Analytics Foundation, of which the link is provided. And as soon as they have a couple, they can grow further. But we can't, for example, grow when we only have one sponsor, and we also cannot grow when we have like 6 sponsors from the energy utility field. It needs to be a field of support to take next steps on that growth path. A little bit of a complicated answer, but this is as close to the situation as I can get, I think.
I can maybe complement this. So basically, the idea and let's say the whole ambition of the initiative from the very beginning was to, yes, at the beginning have funding from the Climate-KIC, so public funding, but gradually move into a self-sustained business model. Now, given that we are one of our main target groups are the technology suppliers, there are a few technology suppliers interested in this information and therefore willing to provide some funding. But the conversations for next year are still ongoing, so we still need to find like a compromise between what will be the contribution from Climate-KIC and what will be the contribution from the industry or the private sector.
Thank you very much. The next question is for you, Clara, and the question is, what results in your analysis across countries did you find the most surprising?
Across countries, yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I think, for example, for B4, so for the social network analysis, for the different stakeholder setups, it's been, my hypothesis was that, or my working hypothesis at the beginning was that they would not vary that much across the different countries, that they would vary across the building typologies, but not necessarily across countries. And they do, in fact, change a lot from one country to another. So I think that would be for me, from, let's say, an analytical point of view, quite a surprising outcome.
Thank you. The next question, I think it might be for Zeno. And the question is, are you in contact with initiatives analyzing regional energy provision as well, like such as municipality level, regions, etc.?
For the work that we are doing, developing a city building market brief, that's correct. We currently have a standard that is based on publicly available information, and after putting that in the concept, we go to the city or the district to get into deeper details, which is very important, of course, for if you have excess heat from industries or for the heat planning of cities. So that's where we are developing it. In the BMBs that we've basically presented today, it's not so much of an issue.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question here, it says it's for both speakers, and it says, heating was identified as being one of the most challenging sectors to reach EU climate goals. Isn't it worrying that stakeholders at national level see a so low potential in heating technologies? Isn't there some more awareness raising needed on those tech?
That's again a very, very good point. But we have to bear in mind that the results that I shared were for Spain. It's a southern European country and therefore a more moderate climate in overall. So in a way, or that was also the conversations we had with the local partners, in a way it does make sense that the heating system are not necessarily perceived as one of the most promising. I can already share that in the German or other more northern European countries, the heating system is indeed identified as one of the most promising approaches to reach climate goals. In any case, I very much agree with that comment or that question that, yeah, definitely for such technologies, more awareness, more campaigns are needed in order to raise awareness in favor of such technologies.
Yeah, maybe I can add, Clara. I'm doing some work in a group called Annex 75, which a link would be via the International Energy Agency. And there we are looking for the optimum on refurbishment and on the bringing in of renewable energy into neighborhoods. So there we go in depth on that specific topic of of heat and insulation, basically. But it's a tremendous challenge, of course.
Thank you very much, both. The other question is for you, Clara, and the question is regarding the information that you gather. Have you gathered by yourself, or did you have partners in each country supporting you?
Right. So as I mentioned, basically the authors are only 3, and we're all from Chalmers. So the main responsible, let's say, for the content development is only 3 people from Chalmers. But of course, we're not experts in every country. We need people to support us overcome the language barrier, to make sure that we gather the information, that they validate the information. And once we analyze and model the results, we need to make sure that these make sense with the local context. So we always find, or we always make sure that we have 1 to actually up to 3 strong partners in each market in order to be able to provide that. So yeah, providing data, helping with the language issue, and validating and contextualizing the results.
So thank you for both for the detailed responses to the questions. So ladies and gentlemen, finally we come to the end of the webinar. I would like to say thanks to the panelists for the informative and interesting presentations, and to the audience for their active participation. We hope that the presentations will be beneficial for all stakeholders involved in energy efficiency. Thank you for your attention, and wish you a good day or night from Copenhagen.